Well, thank you for coming out. My name is Kelly Garber. I'm with Sterk Family Law. We're one of the founding sponsors of the Building Hope for the Future program. Tonight, we've got a panel of guests who I'll let introduce themselves, and everybody should have received a folder. And within the folder, we've got some information from, some of the sponsors. There's a piece of paper in there with, if you want to take notes or anything, so you're welcome to take this back. We also have information about our next upcoming event. But tonight, we've got Cathy O'Hara, who's graciously offered up her home here. So everybody. We've got Chris Alcorn from the Crisis Center of South Suburbia, and then we've got Jennifer Nolan from Sterk Family Law. So tonight's going to be just kind of what we're going to call a panel format. We'll kind of let them introduce themselves, and if you have any questions, please, this is a safe, confidential environment. Although you see a camera, and it'll be on nobody but the presenters, and we'll be sharing this afterwards. So, all right, at this time, I'll let you ladies do your thing.
All right. My name is Cathy O'Hara, and I'm the owner of this salon, and as you've met all my wonderful staff when you came through the door. Tonight, well, what our part as hairdressers is it became a law for us to have a 1-hour training on domestic violence and understanding, who it affects, which is everybody, what the effects are, and how us as stylists, nail techs, estheticians can help out. Our way of helping out, or shall we say, our way of participating is we keep brochures in the salon, in places around the salon, in the bathroom. I have a little counter in the back over there, so people can stay confidential. Like if there's a problem and they see it. I also have in that room we have everybody's business cards, so people can look through those things, and if it's something that triggers them, they can, take a card to help them. I also think it's great that I'm friends with Jessica and friends with the Sterk Law Group, that if somebody comes to me, at least I have places that I can send them to talk. So that's kind of our participation with the whole Domestic Violence Act on our part.
Hi, my name is Chris Alcorn, and I'm the Outreach and Education Coordinator for the Crisis Center of South Suburbia. We're located in Tinley Park, but we serve all of the south suburbs of Chicago. Our agency provides a shelter for up to 35 women and children at any given time. We also provide education in the communities. Cathy mentioned the cosmetology training. Our agency is one of those licensed to be able to give that training and talk about why the state instituted that law. Our hope is to be able to educate enough people so that ultimately we put ourselves out of a job.
Hello everyone, my name is Jennifer Nolan. I am an attorney with Gwendolyn J. Sterk and the Family Law Group. I've been practicing for a little over 7 years, and before that I worked with the Kane County State's Attorney's Office. So I have an insight on the DV, domestic violence, criminal side, and domestic violence, the civil side when it comes to paternity or divorce matters. And at Sterk Family Law Group we provide a holistic approach to matters concerning domestic violence, stalking, harassment, those types of issues. We have a resource center that is fairly large to offer all types of counseling and therapy options, as well as we provide the legal aspect. So when you're ready to move forward and speak to someone and speak to the judge and get the courts involved, that's where I come in. So I don't know, we just have an open discussion, or if anyone has any questions. Maybe?
Yeah, so maybe let's start off with, there's a lot of misconceptions that domestic violence is just more physical. So what are the different forms of domestic violence that people can be aware of?
Well, back in the 70s, the domestic violence community grew out of the feminist movement that some of us are old enough to remember. And a group in Duluth, Minnesota opened one of the very first domestic violence shelters, and they didn't know much, but they knew they didn't know stuff. So they wrote everything down, and they created the initial list of 7 types of domestic violence. And we still use those types today. Physical is obvious. but we also have verbal, we have emotional and psychological. We have sexual abuse, which is sometimes difficult for people experiencing it because they perceive that if they're in a committed relationship, sexual relationship is part of it. They're not sure where the abuse begins and the consent ends. We also see destruction of property. We also see financial abuse, where our victims are not allowed to access resources or funds. And I'm sure that's something you probably deal with regularly.
Absolutely, and that's one of the aspects when we're dealing with orders of protection. We have to look at what type of abuse we're dealing with to make sure that we're entering the right order. If it's stalking, if it's harassment, if it's phone calls repeatedly, if it's, we were just talking about internet and harassment over the internet and other sources, other than the physical aspect. The orders of protection can deal with all of those aspects. We just have to pinpoint which one we're dealing with and go from there. But financial is a big one that I see, whereas the victim is cut off from any bank accounts, any credit cards, and left to ask, can I have $5, or left to be at the servitude of the person that is implementing the violence by way of financial deprivation.
Now, a lot of people who may be going through domestic violence situations may feel paralyzed per se, afraid to speak up, and then there's also a lot of stigma going around with people not understanding necessarily why don't you just leave. So maybe kind of explain some of the persona and kind of the thought process behind some of that.
That's a very charged statement to me. Why don't they just leave? Because if it were that easy, they would. There are a multitude of reasons why victims don't leave, but the primary groupings are fear, funding, and emotion. Am I safer staying than if I try to leave? Because if I leave, is he going to try to kill me? 75% of victims who are killed by their abusers are killed by abusers after they have physically left the mutual home. So statistics bear out that is a real fear. They also sometimes feel guilt for the domestic violence. They feel like if they were able to do something different, their abuser wouldn't abuse them, that it's their fault. And so they don't feel that leaving will benefit them because they feel broken and just perceive they would be broken in the next relationship.
I find that it's a situation that kind of creeps up on you too. Like, everything starts out in a relationship, it's all wonderful, hunky-dory, and I want to spend the rest of my life with that person, and then all of a sudden you get into a situation, or you get married and you think life is going to be great, and all of a sudden, for some reason, the tables start to turn a little at a time, so you can't really put your finger on it, like, is this really happening to me, or is he just in a bad mood today? It starts out, like I said, very little, and then next thing you know, in my own experience, next things are being whipped across the room, walls are being punched, mirrors are being broke. Then it starts with bones, bear hugs that break. I was just hugging you, but you just cracked my ribs. Oh, well, you should have ducked when I threw that. Boof. Next thing you know, you got a big bruise. You're pregnant, you can't leave. I find with women, after I was divorced from my first husband, I saw the movie Bridges in Madison County, and I went into the bathroom and I was like sobbing, because I was like, when men want to leave, they go. When you have children and you have a career, or working, or and if you feel that you might not have any support, or you're kind of embarrassed that it happened to you, you have to plot it out. They just don't go. You have to have all your ducks in a row, and it's tough. It's tough. And what if you don't? I mean, in my situation, I had family support, thank God. But there are people out there that don't. So thank God we have crisis centers, that can help.
That behavior you described actually has a title, and it's called the cycle of violence. And it starts out with the abuser being romantic and drawing you in. And then after he feels confident that he's got you, he turns to that tension phase where the comments, the criticisms, the judgments, trying to get the victim to change her behavior. And then ultimately we end with that explosive phase. And then after a period of time, instead of the apology, you get the blame. It's your fault you didn't duck. Well, it's not my fault. That object shouldn't have been flying through the air to begin with. And so we see those kind of insidious things that come through.
You know, one of the things you brought up is, trying to run away and so forth. Isn't it true that there's like statistic of like homelessness with women and teens and children are a result of a domestic violence? I believe I've heard that.
That's what I've seen when we've cut hair at the homeless shelter. You wouldn't believe how many kids are in there. I mean, when we go and when I bring my staff to cut hair and stuff like that, I tell everybody, we are all a couple paychecks away from being homeless.
Yeah.
About 50% of the women that are reported to be homeless are there because of domestic violence. Even with the most phenomenal shelters, and I think ours is one of the absolute best I've seen, they're short term, they're emergency shelters. 2 months, 3 months, we try to move our folks into transitional housing, help them to establish themselves back in the community. But there aren't always the safety nets that we'd like to be there, which is why it's so important that we get assistance from the legal community, because oftentimes I had a woman reach out to me recently and say, I helped for 25 years. I've helped pay for this house. I've contributed to the retirement fund. I've purchased the furniture. And now I'm going to take my children and go live in a shelter. I don't know how to fight back to get what's fairly mine. So when we have somebody that does that, it's phenomenal for us.
Right. And I think that's one of the fears, going back to an earlier question, one of the fears is, what will I do if I do decide to leave and take that legal action? I have children. I have this house that we built. How am I going to start over? I'd rather, let the children go through school and finish, and once they graduate, then I'll leave. And then it becomes, I think, a whole nother cycle. Like you said, we're romancing, we're back, no children, we're honeymooning again, but then the violence just keeps on going. To where I've seen, we actually go through, we get an order of protection, and sooner or later, we're back together. We went through the whole legal system, and the cycle just keeps on because they need that. Some feel like they need that support and that stability. And even, though they have this bright idea, we're going to be better one day, that one day seems to never come.
We see a statistic that that the average victim leaves 5 to 7 times before they're finally free. And one of the things that brings them back is the fact they don't have resources for, say, their children. Am I living in my car and I can't afford food and diapers, or am I going back and tolerating the abuse so the kids have a roof and heat and food? And I would imagine that as much as you see it, people who don't have legal representation probably see it a lot more. Because you all are fighting for them to get something.
Right. But the fight only goes so far. I can
Right.
only fight as much as I am allowed to fight.
Understandably.
I have a salon full of girls and life. But I teach my young girls here. They hear me say it all the time, day in and day out. Build yourself a career, because then that builds you up from the inside out. And this way, you're more, if you're looking, of course they're all looking to get married and whatever, but at least you're building yourself something, because then if nothing in life is guaranteed. If then your marriage fails, you always have your career to fall back on, and you can always take care of your children. Don't let anybody get that controller. Why don't you, we'll get married and then you can just be a stay-at-home mom, and then all the finances.
It happens.
All the time.
And then that could be a problem. So I tell people all the time, you always have to have your own money. And then the other thing that also is kind of scary with me is my single girls. I talk to them, please date quality people. When you start seeing signs of things going bad, go. Let it go. Because I can control who I hire for the most part, but I can't control who they're dating. And I was just telling these ladies earlier, there was a situation where before this law went into effect with hairdressers, a hairdresser was working at a spa in Milwaukee, and she had left her husband. He came in on a busy Saturday and shot the salon up. And that is a fear of mine, you know. But I talk to these girls and I hear them speak, and I can hear when they talk about their dates and things like that. And if I do hear anything, I did have a girl a few years ago, I was like, look, you have to leave this guy, you know. He's not good for you, you know, DUIs and whatever. Oh, but I love him and whatever. Stop, you know. And eventually I put enough pressure on her, because I was nervous he was going to come in, that she left me and went with him, had 2 children with him, and now she's back living with mom and dad with her 2 kids, you know. So what the foresight that I had and tried to teach and said, come on, let's get it together, she chose not to.
Well, there's a couple of things about that. It's important that you do what you do in encouraging young women. We actually have a program that goes into the high schools to try to teach teens about healthy relationships, hopefully to head off some of this stuff. But 1 out of 3 women is going to experience domestic violence at some point in their life. I was teaching one of those cosmetology classes yesterday to a group of about 50, 20-somethings, and started talking to them about things like, yeah, he doesn't like the way you wear your hair. You know, he's not really comfortable with the kind of clothes that you wear. Or he doesn't really appreciate your friends. He thinks they're just out to get you in trouble. And I kept seeing these 20-somethings looking down and shifting in their seats. And I said, okay, I'm making people uncomfortable. Those are those flags. We can't really tell our victims you gotta leave, because they're getting an unknown amount of pressure from the other side. And there's always a fear I have that if I were to tell a client, you've got to go, they're going to leave me rather than the abuser. And then when they get into trouble, they're not going to come reach out to me for help because they feel they've closed that door. What I can tell them is, I'm really worried about you. That looks really unhealthy. And if you feel like you can talk, I'm always going to be here to help you find things, to give you resources you can use.
Yeah, there.
But we all learn through doing.
I mean, for the most part, even when I have stylists leave, I crack up because they still call me for advice and stuff. But this one particular girl, and it bothers me that it turned into that, you know, with that situation.
Well, that was on him, because he was obviously exerting pressure to get her to leave because you were encouraging her to speak up. And abusers don't like that.
Right.
I actually did a salon in Oak Lawn, and it was interesting because usually when I train, I get a lot of feedback. And it was quiet as a funeral wake. And I only found out later that one of the girls in the salon had been a victim of very extreme abuse. Gun pointed at her, death threats to her child, but everyone in the salon had rallied around her. They'd helped her stay at different places. They'd gone with her to doctors and the courts. They helped her find an attorney. Her boss gave her a lot of time off. And the abuser must have hated that, because she had such a really strong support system. She was able to get free.
Yeah, and I would hope, God forbid, one of my girls runs into a problem, that all of us would rally around and help what we can too, you know.
That's all we can do.
Yeah.
I know a lot of times people who may be victims are suffering, whether it be emotional or physical repercussions of the abuse at home, which may cause them to miss work. So it's nice to know that there are, you know, businesses that are, you know, supportive of that. But Jen, maybe you can talk to the fact that how Illinois has changed a little bit with protections that can carry into the workplace for victims as well.
Absolutely. If you are going through a situation where you need some time off, Illinois has put into place, I can't believe, I think it's 4 to 6 weeks of unpaid leave to handle your situation. So you don't have to worry about retaliation from your employer for taking time off. Look, there's a domestic violence issue that's going on and I need to deal with. The employer has to give you that time off without, you know, any kind of repercussions to you for handling that situation. think it's 4 to 6 weeks. I gotta go and verify, but employers have to do that now.
The only problem we have with the law from the victim side is they have to identify themselves as such.
Yes.
And many of them are so embarrassed or stigmatized or afraid there's some retaliation, they don't want to come forward and do that. And so they get caught in that catch-22. They're victims, but domestic violence and rape are really probably the only two crimes in which we go out of our way to try to figure out what the victim did wrong. So they feel that stigma. Even in shelter, we see people who are very cautious, not only about their whereabouts to avoid their abuser, but just telling the world that I'm in a shelter. Well, they haven't done anything wrong. Their abuser has.
Right.
We go out and we hear frequently, and I'm sure you probably have both experienced this, victims will say that, they share their experience and they hear from maybe their employer, their family, their church, their cultural community, what'd you do to make him so mad? Mm-hmm. Nobody ever asks, or why didn't you leave? Mm-hmm. Nobody ever says, why did he think it was okay to do that? Now I do need to do one thing before we get too much further into this, and that's address gender. Domestic violence victims, according to the FBI, are 85% women and 15% men. Mm-hmm. I personally don't believe that statistic because heterosexual men don't report because they feel it impacts their masculinity. Mm-hmm. And homosexual men often feel that the society to which they're reporting, the police, the courts, mm-hmm. is just as or more threatening than the abusive partner. That's not to say they don't try to find ways to get out, mm-hmm. But they are much less likely to make a criminal complaint or go get an order of protection for fear.
Now, keeping going on the order of protections and kind of backing up, if somebody is comfortable to report it to their employer, isn't there a new law where the employer can implement a no contact or stalking order at the workplace?
Right. There can be some parameters put in place. One, to protect. I had one case where the employer actually gave specific parking space, and they can do that, and for them, other kind of protections. If security is there, we'll escort you to the building, but also within the workplace to say, look, you are not allowed on these premises because there's X, Y, and Z that has happened to Chris on our premises, so you're not invited here.
From a family or friends perspective, is there any suggestion of what we could do if you feel like someone of your loved ones or close friend or anything is victims? I know it's a lot of times people don't ask out for help.
It's difficult because when they're elderly or when they're children, the state says that a concerned individual can report. Some of us are actually mandated reporters and have no choice. But with domestic violence, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the courts assume that the victim is capable of self-reporting. And so there is no mandate on the part of doctors or others unless it's a significant injury.
Right. Yeah.
Friends and family, what we encourage is you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline, the State Domestic Violence Hotline, or any of the local groups. We have one in our agency. There are many others. City of Chicago's got them. Guardian Angel in Will County has it. And they will have counselors talk to family and friends about the most effective way to support that individual in that situation. Whether it's things you can give them or ways you can have these dialogues that are non-judgmental. The way I try to explain it when I get people who are frustrated, everybody's been up all night once in their life. They might have been studying for exams, they might have been up with a sick kid, they might have been out all night partying. No judgment, I've done all three. But you know how you feel the next day? It's all you can do to get the coffee in the cup. Imagine living like that every day. And that's what the victim is experiencing. Sleep deprivation, stomach upset, headaches, vague illness symptoms. The ability to just traverse through the day becomes insurmountable, let alone taking that victim and then expecting them to come up with a plan, find an attorney. That may be one of the reasons they close down in the way they do.
It's exhausting. It's an exhausting process. Who am I going to get to help? Do I trust this person? Am I ready to take this step? Am I ready to go through this whole legal process? It's draining doing a legal process to do a name change sometimes.
Yeah.
So can you imagine having to stand up and tell your story to somebody who does not know you? And you don't know whether or not they'll believe your story. You don't know the retaliation that's going to happen. So it's a draining process. Draining process. And I get it and understand. But again, we just have to continue to combine our resources within the community and share across each agency. We have, attorneys, we deal with other therapists, we deal with other counselors, so we can provide a holistic type approach. We have your back. Talk to the salon owners, and they have other resources, so we can build a network to make it less uncomfortable for the victim.
One of the first things we say, and Cathy, I don't know if you're comfortable speaking to it, but we tell the salon stylists that it's effective, and I'm sure you've done this, just to say to someone, that's the third time I've seen you with bruises. I'm worried about you. It just starts breaking that wall where the abuser is saying nobody cares, or they're not going to believe you. Simple things like, I care, and you don't deserve this. And I believe you, because I've never found a victim yet, or an individual who shared domestic violence with me, who is making it up. If anything, just the opposite, because they're embarrassed and they're downplaying until they're comfortable and they feel they've built a rapport. And then the stuff that you hear is horrific.
Yeah, I mean, I make it a point, and I know when I have my clients, and I've had clients for some of them for 30 years, like when they come in, they're my friends. I actually, if I don't have to take somebody right away, I sit down in the chair right next to my chair, and we have regular conversations. So, about anything. I know about their families. I mean, I'm almost like part of them. And I find that that's what I try to pass on to the stylists. Like, just don't do their hair and leave them. Sit there and talk and find out, because then so-and-so that went to a wedding or their granddaughter's christening or whatever. So, how was the christening, or how was your vacation? Like, you're making that kind of contact and trust. When you just slap color on hair and then go sit in your car and play on your phone, or you're not building. They can get that anywhere. My whole thing is that you want to build trust with your clients and relationships with them. So if God forbid something like this does come up, they're comfortable enough to say something.
Absolutely.
Well, the nice thing about the salons, too, is that for the most part, gentlemen, my apologies, any place that women as a group tend to gather, we talk about relationships, we talk about our kids, we talk about marriage, we talk about the kinds of issues that are impacted by domestic violence. And some of the phrases that we hear every day, we stop and re-examine. Oh, I wanted to do that, but my husband won't let me. Well, that might mean he disagrees with you and you two haven't worked it out. Or it might mean you're not allowed to make any decisions in your household about the way you raise your kids, the way you spend your money. Maybe that's a deeper dive, Well, really, how's that conversation go for you? Or what do you, when somebody comes in, one of the simplest things, and we all hear it, when a woman comes into the salon and says, oh yeah, I can't cut my hair because my husband will kill me.
My husband likes it long.
Yeah. But I ask the stylist when I teach, how many times has someone said that to you and they appeared concerned? They appeared disturbed or upset. If they seem concerned, we got to pay attention. And those are those flags that we were talking about.
Yeah, I had a lady one time, her husband didn't talk to her for 3 months because she cut her hair from the middle of her back to her shoulders. Or you have them come back in, they come in, they want to get a whole new look. So say somebody went from blonde and they wanted a few lowlights or whatever. They go home, their husband hated their hair. They walk out thinking they're looking beautiful, which, they do. They go home and the husband's like, I hate that, I don't like change, whatever. They're calling on the phone crying, I need to come in and get it fixed, Well, why? When you left it, you liked it. Well, when I got home, my husband didn't like it. Okay, it's hair.
We hear that a lot, and I've heard from stylists that the spouse will come into the salon and confront the stylist. How dare you do that? And so what I always say is if they're going to come in and confront a total stranger in their place of business, imagine what the partner got when they got home. We've got to be careful that we don't ever do anything that is going to incite more violence in that person, because they're going to take all of that anger and that rage out on their partner.
Now, Cathy, from like the stylist perspective, I noticed in your washroom that you've got flyers out that are open for people to take. Is there anything else that you're doing to maybe refer them if someone kind of either asks directly for help or is kind of giving a silent help?
We've not had anybody.
Okay.
I mean, because I'm pretty in tune to everything that goes on. I've not had anybody.
That's
That I mean, yeah, the changing the hair color thing, but nothing. No husbands ever come in. Nobody's come in with extra bruises. I mean, the people that I know, like the one lady came in today, she fell in a parking lot. I know that for a fact. I truly don't believe there's anybody that's come in here that's had obvious bruises or has needed that help. I'll have to cross that bridge when I come to it, and I hope to God I never do.
Well, I'm going to help you out tonight.
Okay.
Okay, and the way we're going to do that is this thing I've been playing with. All of you probably recognize it is a lipstick tube. Our agency collects these, and we have volunteers who are wonderful people who will clean them out. My lipstick tube looks a little awkward because what it's actually got in it is a safety plan. And we leave those with salons. You'll notice I brought a big bag.
Okay.
And then if you feel that you have someone that you're concerned about, you can say, take this. The abuser's going to go through the phone. They're going to look at your contacts. They may dump your bag out. But they rarely look at the shade of the lipstick. I do warn people, if you have little kids and they dump your purse out, make sure that's not where it's going to get dumped out by your kid in front of them. I would question though, because I imagine you have lots and lots of customers that you've not had one. I think you've probably had folks who don't realize they themselves are being abused financially, verbally, emotionally, because those, often when we talk to victims and they say, yeah, that was happening to me and I didn't know that. I just thought, him screaming of, yeah, that's how he is. Yeah. Well, you have a right not to be screamed at in your own home. You have a right not to have things shattered,
Right.
or not have access to your money. I had a young lady tell me that whenever she had cash, and they were going out to spend money, he had to take it from her, and had to put it in his pocket and spend it, even when she was in agreement about what they were spending, because he wanted to show her and the world she was too dumb to handle money. He had to do it for her. And so there was all this mental abuse going on that she didn't even realize that was happening. But he conveyed to her in all these subtle ways she wasn't capable of running a household. So when she was leaving shelter for her first apartment, she's like, I don't know how to write a budget. I don't know how to pay my bills. I don't know how to figure out what I'm supposed to do with money, because he never allowed me to have any to learn with. And so we had to do some financial training to get her up and running before she moved out and moved on.
Well, it's interesting that you talked about the training. So from the crisis center standpoint, I know it's like Sterk and then also family law, and also with Cathy O'Hara, we have a multitude of resources that we send out to people so they can look out for help on their own terms. So say they call the center and they are reaching out. So what are some of the services that you could offer to somebody just initially reaching out?
We can do a number of things. We can, first and foremost, if I got a call, I would try to get them set up with a counselor. And there are no charges for any of the programs we offer to victims. Everything is completely free. So counseling for the victim, counseling for children or family members, building those safety plans, filling the paperwork out that's actually shoved in that little tube. We also work with transitional housing folks who may be in the community. We will also get them set up with legal advocacy. We'll refer them to the lawyers that we know and trust. We also have advocates in the courthouse who may encounter the victim fumbling around trying to figure out how to fill out that order, and we can either help them, or if it's more complex, direct them to folks who can do a better job. We also work with them with medical advocacy. We work in 3 of the local hospitals. We also meet victims not only in the emergency room, but in the maternity ward, because being pregnant is one of the most dangerous times for a victim. Anyone who's ever been pregnant knows that all of your focus is on your baby. Abusers don't like that. So we would do all of those things. We do outreach. If you wanted me to come to your church group and do a program for individuals or work with counselors on how we specifically deal with a DV victim, because it's a little bit different than the kind of generalized anxiety or depression another person might experience, simply in the way we approach it and we begin to have those dialogues. We would provide all of that. If they were in an unsafe place, and that's always the first question, are you safe? We have shelter. And if we don't have room, we work with the Illinois Coalition to see if we can find them shelter somewhere else, so that we're not just saying, oh, there's no room at the inn and hanging up. We want them to be in a safe place. Beyond that, we also do education for high schools. When I go out in the community, I have people say, you know, my kid's school is having a problem. Okay, then we're going to send counselors into the school to work with the kids and the counselors to teach children how to have those relationships and where those boundaries should be set. The only thing that we truly charge for is our partner abuse intervention program. It's a program, and this is something the courts are always welcome to order in. Usually it's a condition of a divorce settlement or a parole or probation requirement. And we do a 26-week, 2-hour-a-week group session in which they must complete it successfully to satisfy the courts.
Right. Before any parenting time or
Right.
any unsupervised visits start.
And we do, with permission of the court, charge for that. It's a sliding scale fee. The courts sometimes, if they're indigent, will step in and pay for it. But it's an exceptional resource for a lot of families. Like you said, if you're doing an order of protection, that's a plenary, which is the 2-year.
Yes.
That might be a condition. You've got to go through this 6-month program and, you know, satisfy it for the courts before we're going to let you have unsupervised visitation or whatever the outcome is.
Yes. I'm agreeing.
Family support services available. Is there support services so if a family member is concerned about someone? I know we kind of touched on it before about, you know, mandated reporters and, you know, this and that, but so say I'm worried that my girlfriend is a victim. Is there anybody, or my sister or something that helps support?
Family members, we do counseling, we do group counseling in the shelter for shelter clients and community. We also will work with those family members. Children of domestic violence are a special priority for a number of reasons. When we get someone in shelter and we meet with them, and I'm sure you hear this all the time as well, the parent will say, oh, we only fought when the kids were asleep.
They
Or-
never heard
yeah,
anything.
they never hear
saw
anything. And then we interview the kids when we start them in counseling, and they know more than the parent does half the time. You know, because they know what mom was experiencing, but they also know what daddy was doing, or the way daddy was talking to them when mom wasn't around. And 50% of all children that are raised in domestic violence are physically injured, either intentionally because abusers abuse, or accidentally because they interject themselves into a fight, they try to protect the victim. They might just be in the way when there's a backswing. So we often see that children are physically harmed as well.
Right.
Now, are they able, so if someone uses the shelter for services or comes to you for help, the free therapy service that you offer, is they allowed to keep that ongoing, come back? I know a lot of people may start and then stop and come back. And then...
Yes. They're able to do that. We sometimes see that victims will stop counseling too soon and find themselves a few years down the road in a similar situation. Or they may have completed everything successfully, but then they get out in the world and maybe they have a new relationship and they've got a lot of issues with interpersonal relationships. Should I trust him? Is that a flag or normal? And they'll come back in. We will continue to see clients as long as they want to be seen.
Anybody in the audience have any questions?
Her questions are tough. You gotta watch her.
Yeah, well, this one's not for you.
Good.
I'm just curious because often, you know, with divorces or different cases that need to be brought to court, there's a retainer And so what do we, are there resources for those folks that are in this, other victims of the domestic violence who maybe can't access that money? Or, I just think that, I can think of a few people I know who, can't get $5 to put gas in their car, let alone $5,000 to retain a lawyer.
Sure,
Right.
Sure, absolutely. We have a wealth of contacts of other attorneys and other foundations that offer either sliding scale, or they offer free services or a waiver through their firms or office. Or if you're in Chicago, the Chicago Legal Foundation, or if you go through other advocates or women's lawyers groups, we can find definitely something that will fit the budget of the victim. Certainly if they can't afford our retainer fee or someone else's retainer fee, we do have resources that we say, hey, contact X, Y, and Z lawyer. They will help you. It's a sliding scale or it's free. We have those resources because we do want you to get help. We just don't want to send you away and say, oh, you can't pay for us. We have nothing for you.
Well, in Cook County, will the state's attorney represent you or step up with this order of protection if there's been legal charges?
Criminal. I was just going to say, if it's criminal, yes. If it's civil, no. If it's criminal, absolutely, the state's attorney will step in and help in any way. But when you're talking about civil, when it's dealing with parentage or in a domestic violence situation, they'll always want to have it run concurrent with the domestic violence, and so you'd have to find a civil attorney because state's attorneys won't step in.
Now I have a question for you.
Okay.
I know that in an emergency order, which is a very short-term order, judges don't get into funding, but when we're looking at the longer orders, like a plenary, will a judge freeze assets so that the abuser cannot use them all? So a victim, as has been described, might be able to access the communal funds.
Absolutely. One of the relief portions of the order of protection has financial component to it. So if there are children involved, there's a support component to it. There's also prohibition from the abuser from interfering with bank accounts or financial accounts, any type of accounts. There's a relief there to offer them that relief so they don't have to worry about it. It's court ordered now that you can't mess with my bank accounts, that you have to give me, support or whatever the judge says in terms of the relief for finances.
And is that true if, say, the system was set up within that household that the victim's name was never on any of these accounts?
Okay, so
Right?
two areas. One, if we're talking about marriage, that's something totally different than we're talking about paternity. You guys have never been married.
Right.
So in that instance, in that case, I think the judge will have to take it upon their discretion to say, look, you guys have a bank account. They're interfering with the bank account. It's $1,000 in there. We're going to give this $1,000 to her, or we're going to get $50 or whatever. If there's children involved, for the support of the children, or just for the support to move on. And it's really the discretion of the court at that point whether or not to divide it. In the divorce matter, it's more simple because you have, marital assets we can deal with later on, and just giving the victim some kind of resource to start over, that's easier than in the paternity. It just really is the discretion of the court. But you can definitely ask, this person's not in the position, maybe they're not working, maybe they just don't have access to funds, and the court might be more, understanding of that to turn over the funds.
And we do see that a lot of domestic violence victims are discouraged from working.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just they chose to stay home and let their partner support them. Often even when there's financial hardship, abusers prefer to isolate victims. And so we'll say, get pregnant, you stay home with the kid, and I'll give you an allowance.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yes, I have a question. You had mentioned the 7 types of abuse. When you have certain victims that reach out for help as you go through the process to educate them, do they find often that they've been abused in more than one area? Multiple areas?
All of the areas with the potential exception of physical violence operate together. Some abusers are smart enough to do everything but that, and then be able to say to their victim, well, I'm not abusive, I never hit you, but I wouldn't let you have access to cash, I wouldn't let you make decisions, I wouldn't, I screamed and yelled and threw things, and, abuse can take a lot of forms, and that's why often when we sit with victims and go through this, they suddenly realize the definition of domestic violence is a repeated pattern of behavior by an intimate partner designed to coerce and intimidate the victim. And so there's nothing in there about physical striking. If every night when we get in bed, I turn to you and say, get a good night's rest, it may be your last, that's intimidating. Even more intimidating if I happen to know that you were in the military and there's a gun in the house. If a domestic violence situation includes a gun in the home, the likelihood my victim's going to die goes up 500%. We do something called a lethality assessment when we talk to victims. And things like death threats, information about or familiarity with weapons, God forbid a physical weapon in the house, are all things that definitely amp up the likelihood that there's going to be violence. I don't need to point that gun at you and pull the trigger to tell you that I know how to use it and I'm not above taking it down and killing you if I feel inclined to do that.
I had a friend's mother. They finally did an intervention. She stayed in that marriage entirely too long. And the kids were grown out of the house already, and the kids ended up doing an intervention with her. But what happened, she was sitting in the kitchen. She sold Avon, the mother. She was doing her little Avon things. The dad came in. He flipped the light on, flipped the light off, flipped the light on, flipped the light off. He goes, yeah. He goes, that's what it's going to be like when I put that bullet in your head. He goes, the light will be on, and then it'll be total darkness. And he started laughing, turned around, walked out. Well, she told us about that, and then all the kids finally get together and said, enough, you gotta go, you know? So, I mean, they say crap like that, you know? You're like, what? You know, I'm just doing my Avon
Well,
order.
the reason why I asked the question is with the victim, because who knows how long it's been going on for 6 months or years. Once you're able to sit down with them and address one area, but as they explain their life situation, they realize that, oh my goodness, I've been living with this so long, I've accepted this pattern. And so you're able to educate them and basically identify where this abuse is in these different areas.
Absolutely. What we find most often is that, especially with our clients, and the clients who are in shelter are extremes, there's been that explosive phase. Somebody's been hospitalized. Police have intervened and the abuser's been jailed. You know, DCFS came and took the kids because now they're showing up at school with bruises. Yep. And mom is desperate. And so, you know, they're going to start talking about their immediate trauma. Well, you know, he put me in the hospital, or he choked me to unconsciousness. As we start to unravel, we're not looking at the type so much as the fact that this intimidation and coercion occurred. And as we start backtracking, he was always like that. He was always yelling at me. I just assumed he was just loud. Yeah, I give in a lot, but that's just to keep peace in the house. And they find that they were amending their child rearing practices, their housekeeping. You mentioned workplace. The average domestic violence victim misses 1 to 3 days of work a month and leaves early or comes in late 5 times in a 20-day work month. So much so that we're actually building programs to start educating employers about all the laws that you're familiar with. You know, they have the obligation to provide protection when someone identifies, but they don't know what to do.
Just going along the lines of unfurling kind of the types of domestic violence that occur, usually when we're filling out or helping fill out for a petition for order of protection, and we start talking about the things that have happened, that's when I think the light bulb goes out on, because we're talking about maybe physical. Then we start talking about deprivation of life and of liberty. You know, you're confined to one room or one area. You can't go into this room or that room. We see all kinds of financial abuse, we see all types of things, and once the person identifies, it's kind of like a light bulb goes off. I did not realize that all of these, intimidation, all of these things, harassment, fall under the Domestic Violence Act, and so it's kind of like an eye-opening experience. We're like, don't worry, we have counselors that can help you kind of unfurl all of this now that you realize and understand that it's just not the instant thing when we go in for the emergency order protection. It's just not that one incident. Looking over the timeline of the abuse, you kind of show them where the abuse has occurred and kind of gotten to them to this place.
All right, does anybody else have any questions for our panel? If not, you can always take it offline too if you want to be thinking about it. All right, well, thank you ladies again. So Cathy, thank you again for offering everything and opening your home and then what you've done, working with your staff. Chris, thank you so much for coming out and sharing about the different services and different types of violence and everything that's, out there. And there's a lot of, the information I'm sure is found on your website, or they can call the
Yes.
Crisis Center. And I know that there is information in every folder from the Crisis Center. And to kind of go back to the question about the legal, if anybody feels that they are at the point, for example, our office does offer a free no obligation consultation. So if you can come in and just, if you just feel like venting to one of our attorneys just to kind of get an idea, you're welcome to do that, and our information is in that flyer as well.